Caitlin Clark reaction. Caitlin Clark said, K-Dub, ill. Then she said, my Aussie for life. So she definitely reacted to these players leaving the team. And it's just unfortunate, man. Just an unfortunate situation. But at the end of the day, it is part of the business. Now, something else that has made news is July 2025, instantly a fan favorite, instantly came in and did her job. Impactful player. I give her that. Now, she had been dealing with numerous injuries across the roster in 9 games. With the Fevers, the forward averaged 4 points, 1.8 rebounds, and she played a total of 9.8 minutes a game, providing Stephanie White team with some much-needed depth. And with the number 11 pick in the expansion draft, Portland selected Bibby, leaving her off the Fever roster.
2 players gone overnight, plucked from Indiana's bench in a single draft selection, and Caitlin Clark, the most watched athlete in the WNBA, responded with a public message that stopped the league cold. My Aussie for life. 4 words. But if you know what to look for, those 4 words are a window into a much deeper problem developing inside the Indiana Fever organization right now. One that could define whether this franchise takes a step forward in 2026 or watches a championship window quietly begin to close. The headline circulating right now claims Clark is quitting, that she's walking out alongside her teammates in some dramatic act of solidarity. Let's separate that fiction from what actually happened, because the real story is far more revealing and far more alarming for Indiana's future. Clark isn't going anywhere. She is the franchise. What she is doing is sounding an alarm that the league's front offices, analysts, and serious fans need to hear. Because the expansion draft just did something to Indiana's roster that the box scores will never fully capture. Hit that like button right now, because this investigation goes deeper than a farewell social media post, and what we're about to uncover matters for every Fever fan heading into the most consequential season in franchise history. Let's start with the facts, because the facts are being buried under clickbait. Chloe Bibby signed with the Indiana Fever in late July of the 2025 season, mid-campaign, mid-chaos. Indiana's roster at that point was held together with athletic tape. Injuries had decimated Stephanie White's depth options, and Bibby arrived as precisely the kind of professional that desperate situations demand: experienced, unselfish, and fully aware of her role. 9 games, 9.8 minutes per game, 4 points and 1.8 rebounds per outing on average. You look at those numbers and your first instinct might be replaceable. That instinct would be the wrong one, and here's why. Every single practice repetition Bibby ran was a possession that helped Caitlin Clark and the Fever's starters simulate opponent schemes without burning their starters' legs. Every film session she attended meant the coaching staff had one more set of veteran eyes absorbing the scouting report correctly. Every shoot-around represented a professional body absorbing contact, so Indiana's core players arrived to tip off fresher than they otherwise would have been. Championship teams are built in the margins, and Bibby was operating at the margin every single day. She wore a Fever uniform. Then there's Kristy Wallace, who also departed for Golden State in the same expansion draft. And the fact that the majority of fans couldn't immediately recall her name tells the entire story of what she was doing for that roster. Players like Wallace exist in the shadows of every serious contender. You do not notice them until they are missing. Then suddenly the scout team looks thin. Practice tempo drops. The starters absorb more contact through the early weeks of the season than coaching staffs ever want. By the time that accumulation shows up in a box score, the damage has already been done. This is why Clark's reaction matters on a level that goes far beyond personal affection for a teammate. Clark didn't just post a nice farewell. She publicly named the loss. She gave it weight. In a league where role players routinely cycle through rosters without so much as a tweet from the stars they supported, Clark's "My Aussie for life" message signals something deeper about how she understands team construction. This is a player who has been watching championship basketball closely enough to know that what happens at the end of the bench directly determines what happens in April. Here is the expansion draft context that explains the mechanism behind this story. Golden State, entering the league as an expansion franchise for the 2026 season, was granted the right to select unprotected players from existing rosters, standard procedure for any new team building from scratch. Indiana's front office faced decisions about which players to shield from selection, and Bibby's mid-season arrival appears to have left her outside the protection window. Whether that was a calculated organizational decision or an unintended consequence of the roster chaos that defined Indiana's 2025 stretch run is a question the Fever's front office should be answering right now, because the outcome is identical either way. A proven professional who embedded herself inside Indiana's winning culture has been handed to a direct competitor. What makes the Valkyries' decision even more pointed is which pick they spent to do it. The 11th pick in the expansion draft on Chloe Bibby, not a speculative swing on a 22-year-old prospect with theoretical upside, an experienced, system-smart player who already demonstrated she could function inside a competitive environment under pressure. That is not a coincidence. That is a front office that correctly identified exactly what an inaugural expansion franchise needs, veterans who know how to be professionals, and took one directly from one of the league's flagship organizations. Now, there is a second story running parallel to all of this, and understanding it is essential to understanding why the culture Indiana just lost is so difficult to replace. When Dawn Staley guided South Carolina to a dominant victory over UConn in the NCAA semifinal, the basketball world focused almost entirely on the tactical execution, the suffocating defensive scheme, the way South Carolina refused to give UConn catch-and-shoot opportunities, the way they disrupted UConn's offensive rhythm possession after possession until the Huskies' spirit cracked. All of that analysis is correct, but it misses the deeper story Staley revealed in the post-game press conference. She's haunted by 2023, not metaphorically haunted, genuinely, emotionally carrying the weight of a semifinal loss that ended the season for a group of players she describes as special, freshmen who deserved better, players who never got to compete for the championship their talent warranted. Staley won national championships before and after that 2023 team, but she told reporters she still plays that season back in her mind, still feels the weight of a group she couldn't take all the way. That revelation is not just emotionally resonant, it is tactically instructive because every defensive adjustment Staley made against UConn in this semifinal, every timeout call, every substitution, carried the accumulated weight of 3 years of preparation motivated by that specific failure. Her players felt that emotional urgency without needing to be told its source. Championship coaches transmit emotional investment through the culture they build, and the players absorb it without understanding exactly where it comes from. They just know it is real.
Gino Nim was beating the sleaze off South Carolina. Whatever coaching scheme Don Staley came up with today, it worked. It hella worked. And y'all just heard her say firepower, because she probably realized if we can keep up with them and shooting and scoring, we can beat them. We gonna just beat them down. And that's exactly what they did. They broke UConn down physically, but most importantly, they broke UConn down mentally. They killed their spirits.
Jonathan?
Thanks. Jonathan Tannenwald from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Don, it is, I believe, 3 straight national championship games for you. And what is it, I think 4 in the last 5 or something like that. And I know that each has its own story, but in the big picture, does that have meaning for you in a moment like this?
You said 4 of the last 5?
4, I believe it's 4, what is it, 4 of the last 5, I think, in the last 3 in a row.
Well, for me, I'm haunted by 2023.
South Carolina's victory over UConn was not just a tactical masterpiece. It was the validation of a philosophy that Staley has been building toward for years. The belief that collective investment at every roster position, not just at the star level, is what separates teams that win it all from teams that fall short in the moments that matter most. The connection to what Caitlin Clark just communicated through a 4-word social media post is not coincidental. It is direct, and what it reveals about Indiana's championship ambitions and the very real obstacle now standing between the Fever and their first title is something every serious follower of this league needs to understand before the 2026 season tips off. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Do you think Indiana's front office underestimated how critical Bibby was to this roster, or was losing her to Golden State simply unavoidable? Because the answer to that question determines whether this is a manageable roster problem or a front office accountability issue. And we want to hear where you stand before we go any deeper. The parallel between what Staley built at South Carolina and what the Indiana Fever are attempting to build around Caitlin Clark is not just thematic, it is structural. Staley's program entered the UConn semifinal having spent years solving a specific problem. Earlier matchups showed South Carolina what it could not do against UConn's defensive scheme. The Gamecocks could not generate efficient offense. They lacked firepower at the guard positions. They could defend brilliantly and still lose because their offensive execution broke down under the pressure of the biggest moments. Staley's response was not to find one transcendent offensive player and hand the team's fate to that individual. Her response was to build a system where every player, including players who would never earn All-American recognition, understood their role so completely that the offense became reliable even against elite opposition. Tanya Coates is the specific example Staley pointed to, and it reveals everything about how elite coaches evaluate what winning actually requires. Coates did not win All-American honors this season. Her individual statistics did not place her among the most decorated players in college basketball. But Staley said she gave her complete confidence just by her demeanor in the days leading up to the semifinal. Coaches at that level are reading signals that never show up in any scouting report, the way a player carries herself in warm-ups, the quality of her attention during film sessions, the look in her eyes when the moment gets heavy. Coates had the look, and when the game demanded execution from her, she delivered it because Staley had built a culture where that expectation was real, where sacrifice was acknowledged, and where players understood that their contribution mattered even when the scoreboard never reflected their name. South Carolina's victory over UConn was built on that collective investment. Gino Auriemma has constructed a dynasty at Connecticut through individual excellence. His players routinely win the most prestigious individual awards. College basketball offers then go on to become the WNBA's first overall draft selections and franchise cornerstones. It is an extraordinary model, but in this semifinal, South Carolina's collective defensive execution overwhelmed UConn's individual talent at every position on the floor. The reason that happened is not mysterious. It happened because Staley convinced every player in her program, not just the stars, but the role players, the bench contributors, the players whose names casual fans could not reliably recall, that they were essential, that the system breaks without them, that their sacrifice is seen and valued. Before we continue, if this level of analysis connecting what's happening at the college level directly to the Fever's championship trajectory is why you keep coming back, consider joining the channel as a member. Your support is what makes it possible for us to keep digging into the stories that don't fit inside a 30-second highlight clip. Caitlin Clark is being tested on the exact same question right now, and her response to the expansion draft tells you she already understands the answer. The Fever are building around two franchise cornerstones, Clark herself and Aaliyah Boston, who continues developing into one of the premier post presences in the professional game. That foundation is elite, but Clark cannot generate offense, command defensive attention, orchestrate the transition game, and simultaneously carry the tactical load that comes from a depleted bench. No player can, regardless of ability level. She needs shooters who can space the floor when defenses collapse on her drives. She needs defenders who can absorb the physical toll of guarding the opponent's most dynamic perimeter player for 12 minutes so Clark can conserve energy for the fourth quarter. She needs exactly the kind of professional that Chloe Bibby already proved she was. Share this video with a Fever fan who's been trying to explain why losing depth players matters more than the final standings suggest, because the argument we're making here is one that is very hard to communicate without the South Carolina comparison showing exactly what championship culture looks like at the organizational level. The Valkyries, a decision to use their 11th expansion pick on Bibby rather than targeting a younger prospect reveals something important about how experienced front offices evaluate roster construction. Golden State is entering a league as a new organization with zero existing culture, zero shared adversity, zero proven team chemistry. They need veterans who already know how to be professionals inside a winning environment. Bibby checked every requirement on that list. She knows how to prepare. She knows how to stay mentally engaged when her minutes are limited. She knows how to make the plays that keep possessions alive without requiring the ball to be in her hands. Those qualities are extraordinarily difficult to identify in free agency or through draft analytics because they are invisible to the statistical models everyone relies on for player evaluation. Clark's public recognition of Bibby's contribution solves a problem that no general manager's budget sheet can solve. In a salary-compressed league where the financial gap between franchises is far smaller than in the NBA or WNBA's male equivalent, the intangible currency that teams use to attract and retain players is cultural. A role player evaluating their next contract has to weigh which organization values people like them. Clark answered that question for Indiana loudly and publicly. If you come here, work your role, contribute to what we are building, you will be seen, you will be acknowledged. The best player in the league will call you her friend for life. That is a recruiting argument that no dollar figure can replicate. Here's the forward-looking question that should be keeping Stephanie White up at night as the 2026 preparation calendar fills in. The expansion draft is done. Bibby and Wallace are in Golden State uniforms. The question now is where Indiana finds the next version of what those players provided. And the honest answer is that it requires the same evaluation process the Valkyries just demonstrated. You cannot find the next Chloe Bibby by looking at scoring averages. You find her by watching film, attending practices, asking coaches about demeanor and preparation habits and the way players respond when the coach delivers difficult news about their role. Those players exist in every free agency class and every draft. But identifying them requires investment in scouting that looks beyond what the traditional metrics capture. The South Carolina semifinal demonstrated what is possible when an entire program commits to that philosophy across multiple years. Staley walked into the post-game press conference still carrying the emotional weight of a 2023 semifinal loss, a wound from 3 seasons prior that never fully healed because of the specific players whose story ended prematurely. That emotional investment is not a weakness. It is the source of the organizational standard that produced a championship-caliber defensive scheme built on trust at every roster position, from the first player to the 12th. Caitlin Clark is 23 years old and already operating from the same philosophical foundation. She understands that the players who don't appear in the highlight packages are the players whose presence determines what the highlight packages look like in May. If Indiana's front office is listening, and they should be, the message from their franchise player could not be clearer. Replace what was lost. Value what cannot be measured. Build the culture that makes the margin of error disappear. The 2026 WNBA season is going to answer a question that the basketball world has been quietly circling since Clark's rookie year transformed this league. Does Indiana have the organizational infrastructure to match the talent level they've assembled at the top of their roster? The expansion draft just made that question significantly harder to answer with confidence. If you want to know how the Fever respond and whether that response looks more like a championship contender or a team learning a hard lesson about roster depth, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because we will be tracking every move Indiana makes between now and opening night. The next video in this series drops soon, and the story we're following has only gotten more complicated since today. Don't miss it.